if you could come to the podium so we can all hear you. Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, then Mr. Don Morgan of 105 Brookline Court. Thank you, Mr. Morgan.
Thank you.
Okay, and then we have time for public comment specifically on agenda items, but keep in mind that after especially the New Garden in the Hills presentation, we will have ample time for public comment. So if anyone has anything they want to just bring up now on the agenda items. Nope. Okay. Going to move on to approval of the meeting minutes from the August 21st meeting. Do I have a meeting?
Yes,
Motion.
I'll make a motion that we adopt the minutes as submitted for the meeting of August 21st.
Okay, second.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Nope. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, minutes are approved. All right, we have a treasurer's report with the approval of paid invoices in the amount of $70,488.83 and unpaid invoices in the amount of $667,332.24 for a total of $737,821.07.
I'll make the motion to approve.
A second?
Seconded.
Any discussion? Steve, I think has one check.
Yeah, there is one invoice there for $90.50. That is for my employer. I will not take action on that.
Okay. All right. All in favor, say aye. All right, approved. Okay, Public Works Department report. Is Kenny here or is?
There's no update tonight from Public Works.
Okay, great. All right, on to the airport. I saw John. Great. Okay, we have a fire company report.
Give the report for him. This is for the fire company portion. There was a total of 67 dispatches. New Garden Township was 39, Avondale Borough was 6, London Britton Township with 2, Franklin Township had 0, and then West Marlboro with 2. Notables outside of the district, 3 in Newcastle County, 1 in New London, 1 in Kennett Township, 1 East Marlboro, West Fallowfield had 2, Kennett Borough with 2, London Grove Township with 2, and then Londonderry Township with 2. For the average number of firefighters, 7A to 3P, the volunteer firefighters is 5 career, 2 fire police, and 1 fire police. 6 responses during the month. 3P to 11P. The volunteers, is 10, career 1, and fire police is 3 with 31 responses during the month. And then 11P to 7A, volunteers is 4, career 1, and the fire police, 1, for a total of 9 responses. Saturday through Sunday, volunteers 6, for the 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Career is 4 and fire police 2 for 5 responses, and then 3P to 11P. The volunteers is 8, careers 5, and fire police is 2, and then the overnight 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Volunteers 4, career 1, and fire police 1 for 5 responses. Dispatch to arrival average 7A to 3 p.m., 7.41 minutes, 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., 6.87 minutes, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 9.58 minutes. Property value protected in August was 18 million. Property value lost is 2,250. Notables, structure fires was 24, EMS assists 10, motor vehicles accidents 8, electrical fire 5, vehicle fire 2, trash 2. So on just kind of a notable from the township's perspective, we're starting to track the false fire alarms between now and the first of the year, with a grace period kind of to set, allow property owners to know that that's going to start being enforced a little bit more. Because just in July and August, there was 21 fire alarms. So just we're kind of working on that. For the EMS, New Garden for August was 92 for a total of 753 for the year. Avondale Borough 11 for August and 55 for the year. London Britain is 6, 17 calls for the year. Franklin is 3 for August and 12 for the year. And then West Marlboro is 10 for August and 36 for the year. Couple notables, mutual aid dispatches was London Grove 45, Penn 46, Kennett Township 27 for the year, Kennett Square Boroughs 23, and then East Marlboro's 33, and Newcastle County's 41. So total mutual aid calls for the year 252, and total calls for the year is 1,125. Looks like Thursday's the busiest day of the week year to date for 184 calls. I think that's pretty much should do it.
Right, thank
Unless
you.
there's any questions?
Any questions? Yep.
Okay.
All right, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, then next we have the Southern Chester County Regional Police Report.
Good evening, everyone. Just going to go through some New Garden specific statistics and notables for the month of August. Part 1 offenses, which is your serious offenses, there was 1 burglary, 700 block of Penn Green Road, 5 thefts. Part 2, other offenses, 1 simple assault, 2 frauds, 2 identity thefts, 1 sexual offense, and 5 drug-related offenses. The department responded to a total of 220 calls for service in New Garden Township. Just some of the notable ones here: 30 residential or commercial burglary alarms, 9 noise complaints, 27 traffic-related complaints, 74 assist fire and or EMS, 20 suspicious person, vehicle, or condition complaints, and 1 domestic-related arrest. There were 267 citations issued in New Garden Township for the month of August, 124 written warnings, 1 reportable vehicle crash, 17 non-reportable. There were 7 DUI arrests, 1 assault arrest, and 2 drug arrests. Just some things that's worth discussing here for the escaped prisoner, which I'm sure everyone was aware of. We had roughly 210 man hours assisting the state police and the primary agencies that were affected. Our accreditation, reaccreditation has been set for the month of November. The on-site assessment is scheduled for November 15th and 16th. And on accreditation, Sergeant Kushner has been named accreditation manager and with Berenice as our assistant accreditation manager. We will be present for New Garden Community Day on October 7th. And I do have 2 traffic reports for everybody sees these speed signs that are posted throughout the township here and there. Those signs actually collect data that's we use for enforcement purposes. We have one of the signs was up from August 16th to September 13th. One of the signs was up in the 100 block of Landenberg Road, which is a 35-mile-an-hour zone there. And we had 98% of the vehicles going less than 40 miles per hour. And we had 1% going 41 to 45 miles per hour. And we had at the enforceable rate, which is anywhere 46 to 50 miles per hour, we have 0.12% were enforceable. So it looks like speed, while they may be going over the posted speed limit, the department is restricted to enforcement when using a speed timing device at 11 miles over. So it looks like speed is fairly under control in the 100 block of Landenberg Road, which we've received complaints from them. The other sign was located in the 300 block of Hillendale Road from July 28th to September 13th. And 95% of the vehicles were traveling less than 40 miles per hour. From 41 to 45 miles per hour, 4% of the vehicles were traveling in that. And that's about 5,000 vehicles. And 46 to 50, which is where we begin enforcement rating, is 0.82%. So less than 1% of the vehicles that travel through the 300 block of Hillendale Road are the enforceable rate of speed. So that's all I have unless there's any questions. Thank you.
No, thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
your work. Okay, moving on to business. We have an extension request from the Kennett Consolidated School District about their land development plan for New Garden. That's just something we can just approve, or you need to?
I would say it's fairly straightforward. So recording of the plan was primarily, to my understanding, it was for both. It was to allot time for the permits, but it was also for posting financial security. My understanding, it's mostly about the financial security. They're asking for this request, but they're not delaying the actual start time for the project. So that's what this is for. I'm assuming it's for the size of the bond.
Okay. Do I have a motion to extend the time to July 24th, 2024?
I'll make the motion, yes.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, approve. All right, we have S&P Conveyors escrow release. That's the approval of escrow release number 2 in the amount of $81,167.37, leaving a balance of $242,742.80.
I'll make a motion. We release the escrow in the amount of $81,167.37.
Any discussion? Nope. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, passes. We have a nonprofit budget appropriation from last year's fiscal budget, which was approved in calendar year 2022 for this fiscal year in the amount of $73,500. And that goes to $2,500 we've already paid to the Mushroom Festival, $15,000 to Mighty Riders, $25,000 to Kennett Area Community Services, $10,000 to TAMIC, which is the scoot bus, $10,000 to Brandywine Valley Sports and Rec, $10,000 to Kennett Area Parks and Rec, and $3,500 to the Kennett Area Senior Center. So everything is still outstanding apart from the $2,500 we already paid to the Mushroom Festival. So do I have an approval to send out the rest of those checks?
I'll make a motion that we distribute the money to the nonprofits.
Okay, do I have a second? Any discussion? Nope. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, we have a zoning officer and fire code official. It's a consideration of approval to appoint Robert Weir, the Director of Community Development and Safety, as the Township Zoning Officer and Fire Code Official. You want to speak a little about that, Chris?
Oh, this one's just more of an administrative type matter since we onboarded Robert mid-year, and normally we would appoint this during the January reorg. This allows us to essentially update our org chart as an official reflection of who's actually in the seat. And then this will be indicative of how we plan to update the reorg going forward.
Okay, great.
I'll make a motion that we appoint Robert Weir to the Director of Community Development and Safety as the Township Zoning Officer and Fire Code Official.
I'll second it.
Okay, any discussion? Nope. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we have a Battle of the Brandywine memorandum of understanding to locate the plaque we got commemorating the battlefield and the March of the Armies at 139 Sheehan Road.
Yes, if you would just adopt a motion to enter into that memorandum of understanding with the details to be provided and subject to my approval.
Okay. Okay, do we have a motion to enter into a memorandum of understanding? One will iron out where exactly the cars will be parking because it requires 2-car spots for people to be able to pull over and safely observe.
Yeah, I'll make the motion to do that, David, contingent upon the solicitor's approval.
We have a second. Okay, any discussion? Yep. All in favor, say aye. Okay, moving on to the approval of the non-union township pension plan for 2024.
For both the union and non-union ones, they're basically the same process of when you put forward each motion here. Essentially, this is like a required obligation allotment for declaration prior to the December timeframe of what we plan to put in for the upcoming fiscal year 2024. And this will be reflective on the actual 2024 budget plan as well. The calculations are in front of you in the actual packet. And so you just be approving I guess in this case, the action to submit those funding requirements for 2024.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the non-uniform township pension plan for 2024?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Nope. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, and then same thing, we have approval of the Southern Chester County Regional Police Pension Plan for 24. Do we have a motion to approve that?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Any discussion? Nope. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and quick thanks to Steve and Ted for ironing that out. They did a really great job. Those are never fun things to go through, so thank you all. We have a Park and Rec Board resignation, so we're going to accept Brianna Smart's resignation as Secretary of the Parks and Rec Board effective immediately.
I'll make the motion to approve.
Okay, do I have a second? Okay, all in favor, or any discussion? No. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, we're sorry to see her go, but then
Thank you for
thank you for your
your
service.
service.
And then last, we have the New Garden Hills Town Hall presentation. Take it away, Chris.
All right. I'll go ahead and just kick it off. So the reason that we're having this town hall, as you remember, I believe it was in July, a presentation put together by myself and Mike Buck, the Director of Parks and Recreation, was essentially to update the cost summary for New Garden Hills. So when I first arrived at the township in the beginning of January, part of my, I guess, analysis from end to end for all township financial conditions was to also summarize our capital liabilities. With that, we had essentially the old governing document, which you can even call a governing document. It was basically a landscape architect plan that kind of commissioned our understanding of what we wanted to do at the New Garden Hills site that was directing us to actually start taking on capital projects. So one of the first things that we need to understand was what that direct cost was, because it had never been performed before. So that was what Pannoni was commissioned to do. They finally provided the updated results, and we briefed that in the July Board of Supervisors meeting, and it was to the tune of roughly $30 million. And that was one where, based off a discussion with the board at the time, we wanted to come back and provide kind of a summary to date of all actions that have been done at the site, as well as some of the cost feasibility constraints about having a capital liability at that cost, and then give time for the public to provide extra input that can then provide the board a good sentiment of the vision that we want guiding the project forward. Because my recommendation would ultimately be that we pick a path that we think is in alignment with what the public wants, that is in alignment with our cost appetite as a township from a capital perspective. And then we could actually put in a plan that we could execute and complete within a normal capital timeframe, which is usually that 5-year type time span because of the nature of significantly high cost capital projects. The longer you wait and the longer you draw them out, the cost just always increases and you're kind of just chasing a cost. And we don't want this to turn into, we'll call it a squishy timeline with an ever-growing cost and price tag to the township, specifically for the residents here. So tonight, this is what this brief will entail. And then the real point of tonight is to provide a forum, an open comment time for people to come forward and discuss what they think was their understanding of what they wanted to do with the park. We will be capturing all of this information. And then from there, we'll probably have a follow-up discussion on the summary of what we thought was provided here to date. And then we'll actually synthesize that into an actual plan, like a phased concept plan for the park, dependent upon the outcome of tonight's discussion. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and provide a forum for questions after the fact. We're going to get through the entire brief. When I mean the entire brief, it's only about 16 slides. We wanted to make sure it was pretty concise. And it's kind of twofold. One is about everything to the park to date, and the other one's about kind of the township's capital kind of feasibility assessment. So Mike Buck will be giving the first part here, and then I will follow up with the second part, and then we'll open it for commentary from the board first, unless you want to defer to the public. Okay, thank you very much. Mike, you ready to go?
All right, thanks. If you wouldn't mind pulling up the presentation for me, please. Working great. All right, so as Chris mentioned, I'm going to provide a brief overview of New Garden Hills rehabilitation progress to date. Chris will speak to the capital feasibility of future development, and then we'll have that open discussion. Yeah, can you hear me now? Okay, great. All right, so like I said, we're going to talk about a brief history of the park, how the park was procured, the project timeline to date, our accomplishments to date, updated costs, capital feasibility, and then desired outcomes. So for history of the park, again, historically, the site has been mixed-use agriculture with some mining of kaolin clay. The Catholic Church purchased the property in the late 70s with the intent of creating a day camp, which they poured a lot of time, energy into developing that for the next 4 decades. The use of the day camping had declined in the early 2000s, and the camp fell into disrepair by 2015. It was in 2018 that New Garden Township acquired the property with the intent of preserving the open space and developing a new park. So again, purchased in 2018 for $1.5 million. The funding for the purchase came from open space EIT funds and grant funding. The open space EIT fund accounted for just under 1.3 million of that price tag, and the remaining balance was covered with $215,000 in grant funding. You will note that there are about $70,000 in consulting fees and closing costs that were also included, bringing that total cost of acquisition to $1,570,000. So timeline so far, at our July meeting, there were a few residents who voiced their concerns, wondering, what had happened since the township purchased the property in 2018. So we're just going to go by year, what's been accomplished, so you can get an idea that, or a better understanding of what's been going on behind the scenes here. So in 2018, it was purchased by the township. A recreation opportunity assessment was completed, environmental testing was completed, and then Deerfield mowing and property maintenance moved on site. In 2019, the master park plan request for proposal process began. And then in 2020, the master park plan project was awarded to YSM and also COVID. 2021, Splash LLC partnership began. The YSM master park plan was completed with a projected capital cost at the time of $15 to $18 million. And then with a $500,000 per year operating budget to maintain the park. The township approved traditional picnic and playground rehabilitation project, and the township creates and hires parks and open space superintendent position. Also in 2022, DCNR and DCED grants were awarded for phase 2 rehabilitation. Cedarville Engineering was selected to manage the phase. 2 project. And this is all the work they completed towards that project. So a couple different surveys and some preliminary work on the base plan. The historic White House was renovated for use as a caretaker home. There were over 200 hazard trees removed. The amphitheater was cleared of overgrowth for an engineering and safety assessment. Riparian buffer installation by the Master Watershed Steward Program. Thank you, Stan. Breaker boxes and streetlight timers were replaced. The Pico buyback program replaced incandescent bulbs and street lamps and parking lot lights with LED bulbs. The regional police department established a patrol schedule. We repaired a sinkhole. The park was officially renamed New Garden Hills. The park mission statement was created. Branding and entrance signage developed. Street names created and approved for emergency response purposes. Traffic sign exhibit created and revised. Central line added to the main drive. We had the park access evaluation study and recommendations completed. The Phase 1 Nature Trail project was approved. And this year in 2023, the Dock Center Foundation and Pico Green Region grants were awarded for the Phase 1 Nature Trail. 18 man-made structures were demolished in the park. The master plan was revised, as Chris mentioned, and then a second round of demolition was approved and is actually in progress now. And we have our Phase 1 Nature Trail, which is slated to open by the end of October, which is next month. We're about 70% complete on that project. Now, the updated costs associated with everything that's been accomplished to date brings us to just over $3.2 million. Now, when you consider the Phase 2 project was put on hold as of our July meeting, we have about $49,200 in sunk costs for engineering, and that covered, like, again, the construction administration, the bid administration, design efforts for the preliminary plans. If you take that, you back that out, our total cost to date without Phase 2 are just over $2 million. So 77.1% of the total acquisition cost, with an average cost to just maintain the park in its current state of $77,840.18 per year. Now, as we look and we start to discuss future opportunities at the park, we have the Phase 2 picnic area and playground, which again is coming in at estimated 1.3 million. We have all 3 components of Phase 3, which total to just over 6 million. We have the Phase 4 dog park, 4.5 million. Phase 5 community space and trails, 1.8 million. Phase 6 pond loops and trails, 3 million. Phase 7 open space and trails, just over 2 million. Phase 8 and beyond, the amphitheater and parking maintenance facility, 6 million, $2 million. So total cost to date, or total projected cost, could be just over $28 million. Now, when we look at, other than just doing earth and trails throughout the park, if we're looking at baseline improvements needed to create a central hub with restroom facilities, between the demolition, the rehabilitation of the site, the driveway, water, sanitary, electrical service, that gets us to just over $3 million. So, and it is this option, with these improvements, that the staff thinks would be the best strategy to open the park to the public. Now, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Chris to talk about the capital cost feasibility.
Good. Yeah, I got the clicker of. All right. And do I sound muffled? I know I have the mask on, but I just want to make sure everybody can hear me as clearly as possible. So this is really where the rubber meets the road. It's the capital cost feasibility for the park. As Mike had shown on the previous slide, I just want to go back to it real quick. the red number down there. So the reason it was roughly over $30 million in the last iteration, it's 28.8 within the, let me make sure I've got my little laser pointer. Great. Within this one, there was two concepts for phase 4. So one of them had to deal with kind of a lesser phase 4 concept, and then one of them had a more robust option. This is the more robust option, so there is a lesser one. There was a lot of overlap between the two, so instead of showing both of them at the additional cost of them together, we just said we would pick the highest one, but there are elements in this one that are not included in the other one. So technically, yes, if we wanted to do kind of everything that was on there, it's still $30 million plus for the original price tag, but this is one showing that it's just option by option by option by option. Oops.
Sorry. It's not
There's no, well,
displaying your PowerPoint presentation online.
100% understand that right now, but that's nothing that we can do about it at the moment. So our online viewers will just have to painfully listen to my droning voice here as we go through. For some reason, the camera is not connecting to the actual YouTube feed, and that's the issue right now. But the sound audio is coming through, correct?
Mm.
As I can tell. All right, great. All right, so really just in terms of speaking to the layperson, what enables us to actually do capital is a reflection, really for the most part, to fund and facilitate capital funding based off of what we have on book, which for us has primarily always been some semblance of a replenishable revenue. You need to have a certain amount of tax revenue support in order to be able to commission a transfers towards your capital fund at the level of which your capital appetite really is. So right now, let's say that we have about $243,000 per year of capital cash. That's a product of our own overall annual revenues. That is what we apportion towards capital on a year in and year out basis. So just to give you some economies of scale, this is a $28 million product that we have also other competing capital liabilities for, and we only apportion $240,000 per year for capital projects in this township. So right now, usual best practice, and I like to talk about industry best practice when it comes to just local government funding and financing, usually is your capital project and your capital fund is a reflection of your general fund. So unless we were essentially armed at like Fort Knox style with capital cash on book, a $7 million general fund should have some orders of magnitude lower than your capital fund. It should be within that ballpark. You know, if you had a $70 million capital fund and a $7 million general fund, I would raise a hairy eyeball to that just because it doesn't make sense. So for us, our transfers of revenue based off of roughly an 8 to 10% margin, which is usually kind of the benchmark that you want to establish, because that means you have some sort of solvent revenue stream that you're funding your capital fund every single year, where it should equate to roughly about $750,000. So if you remember, I said 243, we're 2 to 3 times lower than that per year. And that's actually based off of an increase that we did the year prior. So we actually had lower levels than that. So in terms of a township, our commitment to capital projects has been whatever we had cash on hand, and we've just been spending down that balance towards an insolvent level because we don't have anything behind that to replenish that revenue source. So this is just a summary of that. And once again, just more so, really the reflection of our capital appetite right now is a reflection of our overall weak primary tax revenues that we have for the township. I went over this pretty ad nauseum in the state of the township brief when we talked at the last budget discussion. But right now, I think it's understanding that unless we fix our tax revenues, we will never be able to increase our capital contributions, which means we're always going to have a lesser appetite for capital projects in this township, sans current funding that we have on book, which is essentially our cash position that we have. Our cash position is a finite tool of resources that we have that we don't have, like I said before, any sort of replenishment model in place to be able to build back after we use that funding. So this is where we're talking about our fund account available for cash. So this is our usable balance of existing cash from what we had collected into our fund account from years prior. And this is actually usual practices. You want to build up your fund balance within your capital fund. You spend it down to a certain level, then you kind of hold on capital, and then you build it back up. The issue that we have is we don't have an end in sight for capital liabilities. We only have stacks and piles of priorities that are just building up in front of us that we have deferred because in years past, we had never addressed those capital needs because we either A, didn't build up the primary revenues to address it, or B, we just never had the cash on hand. So this is what I refer to as a pay-go model. You pay what you have and you just address your capital. The issue with this is, especially from a pay-go standpoint, is you're always going to be chunking projects. And if you're always in this, then you have to pick projects that you can finish on time, because if you're chunking project, this isn't like a, like a home remodeling DIY type effort where I can go back to every once in a while. These are massively scaled projects that only exacerbate with cost increases over time, which is why I try to say pay-go model can work as long as you have the cash to complete it within a 1 to 2 year time frame. For the most part, all of our capital projects have that. The issue with New Garden Hills is it's for a 130-acre site and it's almost $30 million. Even if we were to have all the cash tomorrow, it would still take 5 years plus at least to complete it, especially if we just have one staffer really working on this on a 24/7 basis. So really, it's the economies of scale for the size of the project that make it so difficult for our township to be able to come up with a strategy. And like I said, that's even if we had the actual usable cash on book for it. But in this instance, we don't, unless we look at our $22 million investment income balance that we have from the sewer sale. Now, normally that would be something that if you were to build up to that point and you had a massive project and that was in alignment with what the public wanted from a value standpoint, then that would be one thing. But right now, we're using the dividend machine from that $22 million to plug a lot of other holes. So right now, that 1.1 million is all being expended on an annual basis to do other capital projects. So we're basically creating cash out of our sewer sale balance to do other capital projects. So if we're to eat into that balance, we automatically lose our ability to do a lot of other things as well. Unless, as I said, with our primary tax revenues being so weak right now, we would have to bolster up that in order to be able to replace that, if that makes sense. It's kind of like a, one hand versus the other. You have to just pick an option and stick to it. So right now, I just wanted to show some of the obligations that we have, and this isn't a finite list. This is just some of the larger items that we have on book just for at least the next 5 years. Staff has been pretty supportive in my request to have a fully baked 5-year capital plan with all defined liabilities as they understand it for the next 5 years. So we now know at any point in time, not just what's due next year, but what's within the next 5 years. I'd like that to get to be a 10-year plan, but for now, in year one, we're going to focus on the next 5 years. So with that, our paving program has always been something that has been wholly ignored for the most part from a funding standpoint. But it's one where we finally got an understanding of what it costs to do 3 miles of paving. We have 60+ miles of roads. They say you want to replace your entire road network within 20 years. So a 3 mile per year program is what it costs. This is what that costs annually, just to be able to do 3 miles worth of roads. This is based off of the most conservative cost estimate for the type of milling and paving. If Kenny's listening to this, he's probably cringing on how I'm trying to describe this right now. But just know that this is kind of we'll call it benchmark for if you want to do 3 miles of paving, it's about $1.6 million a year. Stormwater is a huge issue for us right now, both from all different phases. One from an MS4 standpoint, one from an actual infrastructure replacement standpoint, and one for just things that happen when we actually have stormwater issues causing other capital infrastructure issues, which it's kind of a runoff, kind of creating a washout of some sort of part of our infrastructure. So culverts are ones that are historically weakened by excessive stormwater issues in your township, which we have because we have impervious surface. We have a lot of undulating terrain and a lot of water recently. So these are just the ones within the next 5 years that we've already talked about. For Tough Kenneman, there's 2 scope. This was based off of Cedarville's briefing earlier on in this year. But it's one where Tough Kenneman is very much a part of our comprehensive planning strategy to revitalize and hopefully improve infrastructure there. It doesn't make a lot of sense to do a lot of investment into Tough Kenneman if it's underwater, every other, significant storm event. And you can see there's a pretty broad range, but even at the lowest end, which is only a 2-year for 1,200 linear pipe replacement, you're basically, doing the bare minimum at that point. So really, if you want to do the actual long game with that one, it's about a $4 million project. Some other ones, just in terms of large scale equipment and fleet needs that we have, our public works, facilities, I say not facilities, but our public works equipment. For all of the road bank mowing that we need to do, all of the servicing that they need to do for our street program in and of itself. That's big, heavy, large, expensive equipment. And every 10 to 15 years, it calls for a replacement. And that stuff is not very cheap. Facilities, part of this was part of getting an update on our town hall. It's a 20-year roof that is basically aged in about 15 years. So we're already, based off of our engineering assessment, due for a new roof for town hall. So that is a 25,000 square foot roof spec'd out somewhere between a little over $500,000 to $1 million just for a roof, dependent upon materials. That'll also be coming forward in the capital plan, as well as some other parks facilities that we have in our new garden park. And then, of course, we bought another park in and of itself that, while the actual restoration effort for Smedley Preserve, which is the Lochner Golf Course, has its capital expense for all of the conservation improvements that we need to do there, there's also the road and street improvements that we need to improve public facilities, parking, bathrooms, things like that need to be connected somehow to have a viable product that people in the public would actually want to go there for. These are things that aren't necessarily grant viable, and that's another issue. So a lot of the projects that we have right now are ones that we have gone past what is locally supported, both in Chester County and Pennsylvania, who are really strong in supporting initiatives like conservation, open space preservation. But when it comes to hard costs like brick and mortar type features, concrete, things that actually cost a lot of money, there's not a lot of money there to do it. So we're actually the primary financer to get these projects done, not through grants. So with that, less the $1.6 million annually that we have to look at in terms of just how much paving we want to do, less that within the next 5 years, we have between $5 to $8 million worth of capital liabilities to also address as well. And that's just from these projects, not all the projects as well. So that's a very big number for a township of our size from a general fund and capital fund standpoint to prioritize. And then on top of all this, you put on almost a $30 million park project. You can start doing a little bit of the calculations in your head. It's not a very tenable situation for us from a cash standpoint to be able to address all this stuff within any semblance of a feasible time frame. So another scenario I wanted to propose, just to make sure we have all options, but I will preface this. But before we get there, what is our net cash position? This was also in the State of the Township brief that I prepared 2 weeks ago, I think now at this time frame, that shows our net cash position. So really, when you think of your net cash position, we want to think about liquid cash that we have on hand to actually fund different types of priorities and projects. So up there at the top, you can see, and actually there is actually to the left of this, a spending amount that we've had that has basically taken a one position down towards an ever decreasing type position. So our multi-year percentage changes shows that this is more of a reflection of our general fund having that structural deficiency from a cost perspective. And that's what we're talking about, that that potential millage increase. That's just to plug a hole that already exists. Independent of that, you're talking about your actual capital needs. This is stuff that we've already spent and earmarked to date. So we're actually also have a finite amount of resources here. And so really, it's just talking about these are the sources of funds that you actually have in terms of immediate cash on hand to fund whatever types of needs you need. I would really say that up top, your general fund is one that you don't necessarily ever want to touch. You want that to be created as a reserve fund. It should be roughly 6 months of usable cash on hand in case of emergencies. We're kind of at that point right now. So we're already at our balance of what we need on hand to preserve that general fund reserve limit. Another one from capital, I think with phase 2 being deferred, we're actually going to pull back some of that cash. So it's actually a higher balance that we'll have in terms of what was originally projected at the mid-year point. But you're still talking about a total balance of about $4.4 million right now. And the goal isn't to spend all this. This is your entire capital fund account that you have. Now you can put that in the aggregate with our capital reserve fund. That's kind of a nomenclature type thing. These accounts are one and the same. In fact, my recommendation is to merge both. You don't need 2 capital funds. You just need one. You just need to have a fiscal policy that dictates how much you're actually putting into it and then protecting from a percentage threshold standpoint. And then, of course, we have our sewer balances here, and that's one where it's relatively flat and it's mostly just generating income from a percentage investment standpoint, which right now I think it was what, 5.8% projected for this year, but for next year, you never know what's going to happen to rates as they come down flat and stabilize. But really, it's this kind of total cash balance on hand. And as you can see, we've had a net decrease in those three primary funds that shows kind of where we're headed, as well as if we don't have something to stabilize the general fund, we would actually have to rob Peter to pay Paul here. We would have to actually pull from our capital fund to plug into our general fund just to keep that floating for a few more years until that eventually whole model would be insolvent. So this is one that's not recommended, so please don't print this in anywhere else like that. But basically, it's like, what if we were able to put a public referendum out and issue out debt to cover the entire cost of the park? So this is a theoretical, hypothetical type situation, but just basically to do the thought exercise of what it would actually take to actually go through this process and how much it would actually impact the net residents. So generally, when you have a cost of this size, think of it like a building, like you're going to build like for the schools. You know, this is roughly what would be incurred in a cost for building a modern day building. So normally to do that, you would secure financing by doing a issuance of a public referendum to incur a general obligation bond in the amount of X, which in this case would be the $28 million. And with that, you would go into a payment structure for the next 30 years to pay off that debt. So we did the math, and that roughly would be a $1.9 million per year payment for the next 30 years. So with that, you would then have to also increase the millage rate. It would be a debt millage increase, and that would equate to probably about 2.3 mils just to cover the cost of your debt incurrence. So on top of having a general fund increase just to plug the hole in the budget, you'd have to also do another increase on top of that just to cover the debt for the park. And that would be for the next 30 years. So that's 2.3 mils per year for the next 3 decades. So with that, in the YSM plan, it said that residents would be willing to pay somewhere between 20 and 40 bucks per year extra. So you can already see that this math is not going to add up. So with that, that would equate to about $530 per year extra per household for people who have houses valued in the $250,000 range. Like I said, that's not everybody, but it's a generality for what it would mean in terms of total cost. So last time I checked, 530 is higher than 20. So if we did it on EIT, like we do for open space at 0.125% yields about 450,000 annually. So in order to do that, we would have to get 4 times the amount of open space to get to that $1.9 million number. So that would equate to roughly about the same, about $500 per person. So you can see in either instance, it's significantly higher by about 25 times threshold for what people would be willing to pay extra in terms of taxes for the park. So my guess is this would not pass very well in a public referendum process and would likely get voted. So this is a losing strategy that, once I said, I'm not recommending anyway, but it's just the exercise for what it means for taxes. So last and not least, it's essentially aligning what has already been defined in front of us for the outcomes that have been desired there. So what YSM study didn't necessarily do a good job of in terms of actually aligning the actual, in this case, cost structure of the park and some of the things that they had done for the actual landscape architecture plan. They did a good job of getting the public input and the generalities of the survey inputs into commissioning kind of an output that, to me, this is the template for what we should be following in terms of what the public is telling us. I don't know if this has evolved at any point over the last few years, but at least this is what they were telling us at least 2 to 3 years ago. So for the most part, you can kind of get a sense of the same theme here. It's some sort of outdoor fitness, walking, jogging, experiencing outdoors. And these are all what I consider to be good percentages. Normally, you're lucky to get a consensus above roughly 40, 50%. So I have ones in the 80s, almost 90s. That tells you kind of what you need to be doing if you're going to be expending funds. Another one in terms of township priorities, development of trails, enhancing the natural areas around the park. So this is, I think I have a key here, but this is high priority and medium priority. So you can see that even if you might not have, that super high priority above 60%, that in conjunction with medium priority, it jumps up to 90%. So people are telling you that, they want some sort of a blend approach here for the desired experiences. The importance of renovating current facilities. So when we're talking about all of the current facilities that need not necessarily a renovation, they need a complete collapse down to the studs and rebuild, which adds a lot to our facilities expense. And it's a good part of the park there because the current ones are non-usable. These are the ones that they had kind of aligned with, which for the most part, when you think of facilities, really restrooms are the only brick and mortar type structures that really come up here. Everything else is like from a facility standpoint, just enabling like a trail network to exist in a passive open space. And then last but not least, so this is kind of just, hammering on the same point over and over again. But you can see kind of what the actual desired outcomes were for the park. And the issue with this is this was in the same study that showed the entire list of objectives that they had also done that was very active amenity rich. And so there was a natural kind of, to me, when I read it, almost confusion with what are they trying to propose here? It's one or the other, but the public sentiment does not match what they actually designed and the actual cost of the actual facilities that we're proposing for all elements of the park. But that's not to say that even just doing the trails component of it, I think when Mike talked about all the trail components of it, it's still a significant expense just to do trails. So other than harnessing the current hardscape, which is the road network that's in existence right now, being able to do any kind of retrofitting for off the hardscape, jogging trails or mountain biking trails or anything through there, that's still going to require a significant investment from the township to even make that happen. And it's mostly because it's a 130-acre property and it is a very complex type of terrain out there. So you're talking about a lot of grading work, a lot of clearing, a lot of maintenance, even from a trail perspective. So I can't even dismissively say, oh, if we just do trails, it'll be cheap and cost efficient. That's not necessarily the case. So I will go ahead and leave this up to public comment time unless there's any immediate pressing questions for clarifications prior to the actual forum here, but that's at this time here for the board.
Okay. Do any board members have any clarifying questions? Then otherwise we'll open up to the public and then we'll come back to us for any follow-ups. No good? Okay. Do you want to lead the discussion with the public or do you want me to?
Yeah, I didn't know if there's anybody signed up at all that was just public comment time, but
No,
you can
just the two.
basically just leave it open for them. If you want to, you can just kind of form a line out here, but you would have to come up to the podium, announce your name, your address, and then just any comments you have about the park.
My name's Pete West. I'm the current president of Somerset Lake Service Corporation. Could I go back to slide 12? Right. I was wondering, this is the first I've seen a comprehensive list of this project, which is terrific. What I was like to ask, is the downstream restoration project part of this included with that MS4? That's number one. And secondly is, did you consider in the restoration project the funds that you can retrieve from that project?
Do you mean stormwater credit? Is that what you mean?
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't think we hadn't
So I just want to make sure I understand the question. When you mean downstream restoration, what are you specifically?
for Somerset Lake.
In other words, the lake quality, or in regards to our concern is lake quality.
Yeah.
That particular project does provide sediment and whatnot
Yeah.
coming downstream
Correct.
significantly,
So-
including nutrients and things
Yeah.
that affect our water quality. Now, if you're doing all this type of restoration or rebuilding project and stormwater, you absolutely need to consider the downstream restoration.
So everything to my understanding was from a MS4 investment, the township, I don't know if it was last year or the year prior, entered into agreement with PennDOT. And that was a cost sharing agreement for MS4, and it was $415,000 worth of ARPA funding. And at the time, there was a dedicated site that they had done a study on that was going to yield the total, not credits in this case, but the total reduction, which for the township was assessed to be over 330,000 pounds worth of sediment. And so everything to date on a timeline perspective, that agreement is still in good standing. It's just that there has been an issue with the prior person who was commissioned to do the project with PennDOT. So they're going through a change order type process. To my understanding, that change order meant that the price per pound has gone up. The economies of scale of what we could have done has gone down. So we need to go through a partnership type of understanding with the new person who's going to be working with PennDOT to provide those. So outside of the committed $415,000, no other township obligated funds have been brought to date.
Okay, all
And
I can
the site
tell
is still to be determined, but it's based off of what can yield that poundage that it gives us the total value, which from a township, there are other outcomes that we want to do in terms of impacting quality of water in other areas of the township. But the overall goal is to make sure that we are compliant with our MS4, which for us is the biggest bang for our buck type approach. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, that's a substantial amount of funds you can get back, but just to let you know that we're also looking at another part of our property for the same type of project. And that is the Meadows stream coming down to basin number 2. We've been dealing with a restoration company. We're going through our community to try to identify the benefits and pros and cons rather. And I think that an understanding of what you're going to do and what we're going to do may help our overall community.
To answer your question, I have asked the person who's now working with PennDOT to assess New Garden Hills for opportunities. We just have yet to get feedback from that organization of what is and isn't, but I expect that's going to be happening soon.
Yeah, our initial estimate from our company we looked into was about 130,000 for us. So I think as a total project, as a partnership, I think that we could do a lot better. And most of our problem is from this particular project as far as the sediment downstream. And that would be, if we could work together to get this resolved, this would be a big benefit to our community.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
think just to clarify with what you were saying, we don't have a definitive amount or knowledge of what the cleanup is that we would be putting into this project as it would affect Somerset Lake in the downstream. So we could, in talking with PennDOT, we can get an idea of what we would do. But again, PennDOT, I think, would go and say, much like what they're doing with that other project, they would say, we're going to cut all the trees out 100 feet on each side, redo everything. And that might not kind of jive with what we're looking at doing in terms of the reconstruction. So when we reconstruct it, we might have different levels of work we're going to do on it. So it might not be as much as PennDOT would have.
Now,
been able to
PennDOT,
pick.
are they the recipient of the credits?
Usually they're the ones that want to buy it.
Other,
Right, yeah.
it's not just, PennDOT, there's a lot of corporations out there looking for credits.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, sorry to belabor the point, but I think a lot of other issues we're facing as Somerset Lake is from even north of that project, which is the White Clay Point. So I think the hope was that when White Clay Point comes online, they would essentially put in a lot more money, a lot more, private equity to kind of stop that from coming down into New Garden Hills, and then we could manage it on our end. But it's a shared thing of that entirety of that 300 acres. It's not just the 130 we're talking about tonight.
Talking about the commercial development on the top.
Yeah, and the residential. So yeah, you have to look at holistically that entire 300 acre watershed that, again, as a Somerset Lake resident, I recall that.
Thank you.
The FX Brown meeting.
Yes.
Thank you, Chris.
Yep.
Good evening. My name is Eileen Donnelly. My husband and I live at 240 Crescent Road in Harrogate, in Landenberg. I have just a comment, an observation, and a question. The sale, I wanted to comment on the phrase weak revenue tax structure. And through a tremendous amount of work by individuals in our neighborhood, including Pete Merzinski, who's here with us tonight. We have learned a lot about the repercussions of the sale of the sewer system and potential ramifications of a sale of our water with Chester County. And that has passed on with the sewer system, very significant increases to the residents of New Garden Township. Although it's not a tax, it's a much higher cost. And the same could happen with water. We've been involved with meetings here that have brought much greater transparency than we ever had before with those two issues. So that's my comment. My observation is that a purchase was made and a vision was created and the two are not at all in alignment with what we're able to afford. Thank you, Mr. Himes, for outlining that with such great clarity tonight. I'm very happy to see that. But for us to even consider investing $28 million when I'm sure there's not only important existing projects, but many other things that may be needed. It could be schools or whatever things. So my observation is that what we purchased is completely out of alignment with what we can afford. And truly, in a later slide, you showed what people want. So my question is, if it really isn't realistic for us to refine this beautiful area, that we back up to it. It really is beautiful. I've been very anxious to be able to walk and use it. Is one of the considerations selling it? Because if we can't afford to improve it, because to Mr. Himes' point, even putting in trails in a safe way is millions and millions of dollars. Did we make a purchase that really we can't afford to improve and maintain? And, I'm not asking for an answer for that tonight, but making an observation about what happened with the sewer, and we never knew our rates would go up so much. And then understanding this level of transparency, we got so excited about having this as a township resource, having the splash park come in. We went to meetings about all of that, and nothing has happened. And it was purchased 5 years ago. So I just raised the question. I mean, can we really afford to have 137 acres of beautiful land and be able to use it? Because right now nobody uses it. So it's an asset that was purchased, perhaps with a very good intention, but really it's not realistic. So it's just my question.
Thank you for that. Yeah, just a couple things. I just want to thank Chris, first of all, for really, going through and, as you can see, showing exactly what the costs are. I think this would have been a very different discussion if he had been here 6 years ago. We would have gone in with our eyes much more wide open. I know Christy's about to jump out her chair because that's the exact thing that she's been harping on for her entire term. If you want to speak to that issue, and then
I
we
mean,
also
you've seen it.
have a
And you've
thing.
ever done like a home improvement project in your own personal yard and you know how much that costs. And then you go and you look at St. Anthony's and you can just, I mean, I'm not a construction expert, but I know that costs a lot of money. And I know we don't have that money because the same thing that happened with the sewer system is the same thing that happened with the infrastructure. No improvements all along. So now we've sold the sewer system for almost the same amount of money that is going to cost to do this pie in the sky dream for St. Anthony's. And we have a unlimited bucket of priorities that absolutely cannot be kicked down the road anymore. And that's why I think all of us, I mean, I'm not going to speak for everybody here, but it's kind of disheartening to sit here and this is the situation you've been handed, and people get prizes for preserving, land where I don't understand if they ever saw it,
Right.
I mean, I'm glad that it's preserved and it's not a development, but alternatively, and this is just a hypothetical question, and I don't even know the legality of selling it. So we would have to explore that. I'm not trying to go down that road.
I was gonna say, we can actually address that real quick. here
One
if you want.
second. But if you sell it, it gets developed.
That's,
Not,
And then just really quick,
jump
I'm
on her
just
chair now.
saying a hypothetical, the same people who don't want to see it,
Right.
the cost
into-
associated with maintaining it also don't want to see it developed. So, we have some tough decisions to make, all of us, not just me, all of us as a
Every-
community, but,
Everyone pays taxes.
and that's not just for St. Anthony's in the Hills. That's, for everything. So there, and soapbox.
And
Sorry.
Our attorney has preemptively figured all of this out.
Um,
Lovely paragraphs can we actually put this into the record after we?
Well, it's not my best writing.
Okay,
It's
we'll
just sort
forgive
of
you.
a synopsis of what happened. Sorry. I
Like-
put together, it's not even, I don't know what qualifies as a memo, but it's.
Yeah.
No? It's
on,
on.
It's just.
How's that?
Better.
All right. It doesn't qualify as a memorandum. It's really just sort of disjointed chunks of information about the transfer. I was not involved with New Garden Township in 2018, but I think as Christie says, you now have a piece of property. So this isn't a legal opinion. This is an observation. You now have a piece of property that will never be developed. So in your township, whether you get to walk on it or not, there is a 130-acre parcel that will remain open space. And the reason for that is that I think $1.2 million came out of your earned income tax money. That earned income tax money is specifically restricting. It can be used for agriculture. So you can actually rent it to a farmer, whatever could be farmed, or open space. And open space includes parkland, trails, that sort of thing. What the grant from the county said is not only does it have to be used just for agriculture or recreation or open space, and if you cannot use it for any of those things, it just is open. It's just open space. So selling it to a developer is never going to happen. And whether you're happy about the progress, and sorry, this is not a legal opinion, I'm just looking at it sort of as an outsider or not, you now have a chunk of land that isn't going to be 100 houses or 500 townhouses. It's going to be open. And eventually there will be money to do stuff with it. So it can't be sold unless you're going to sell it to somebody who's going to keep it open. You could sell it to a farmer. I don't think the terrain lends itself to a lot of agriculture, maybe a Christmas tree farm. But so what this document that I have prepared, as I said, isn't my best prose, but it kind of is a succinct explanation of the money used to purchase it. So what you have now is something that's got for perpetuity. All of it is perpetuity. It can never be used for anything but open space or agriculture, with the exception of the buildings. The easement that's on it from the county doesn't include the houses, but the tax money that was used to purchase it out of your earned income tax is for the whole place. So essentially the whole place can only be used for recreation, open space, agriculture. You can't have a cell tower on it. There's a whole list of things specifically under the county grant. And that was grant money that you got. You can't use it to spray sewage effluent. You can't put, you can dig under it. You can't spray sewer on it. I think I said that. You can't put compost on it. So there are a lot of restrictions on what you can do with it. None of which is to develop it. If you sell it, you have to sell it to somebody who's going to keep it open. So.
I just want to read 2 paragraphs real fast
Sure can.
that I think will answer this. Quote, as part of the program that the township agreed to record a covenant running with the land requiring, quote, the continuous use of the property for open space, natural areas, natural resource conservation, agriculture and/or public parks, trails and greenways, and to hold and manage the property on behalf of the public trust, including protections afforded under the Donated or Dedicated Act, Donated or Dedicated Property Act, and whereas the township, as the owner, intends to permit public access and or agriculture, and further to preserve and protect the conservation values of the property in perpetuity. The area subject to the restrictions approximately 105.071 acres, and if it is determined that the property is deemed inappropriate for any of the originally intended permitted uses, it is understood that it shall just simply be open space and free of any use or encumbrance prohibited by the declaration of the township. The term of this is perpetual. So unless someone wants to do all those things I just listed. So, yes. I believe. Yeah. I think it was 75,000, 70.
Well, it depends.
And
So,
that's, yeah, that's just what we're doing right now. That's if you just,
yeah. Not, actually, it's less than that. So what I want to everyone to understand is over the course of the last, year with the acquisition of Smedley Preserve, and then with this park, and then with our centralized park that you're sitting in today, we as a township have over 300 acres of total park property, and we have one maintainer. So part of that is, so we have one person who is actually commissioned, their full-time job is parks maintenance official. So he's actually an army of one. So if you want to have some semblance of a routinely maintained trail network, something of that ilk, and it would be as what phase one is going to be, a very Spartan type of trail concept. It's kind of like an as is, if you will. It would be what, roughly one mowing, because usually the terrain to get over with, it's pretty tough terrain to get in there and actually clear paths and stuff. So that's really what we don't know right yet, is how much trail network is going to cost to go through a 130 acre plus property, in addition to the expense for the park that's coming online, which is Smedley Preserve, and what we do know, which is the cost of maintenance for this park as well. So if we do nothing, expectation is nothing, then it would be roughly around less than that $70,000 per year just for this facility site, not in its totality for all parks maintenance. If you want to have additional trails, that expense is only going to go upwards, in which case, we don't have an inverse relationship with revenues that are increasing to add to that cost. So it's going to have to come at an additional cost from a tax standpoint in this instance, because we don't have it coming from anywhere else, because we're not seeking, park fees or anything associated with people visiting and touring the park like you would like a state park. So that's one thing that you have to think of. So really, when I say it's very imperative that we define what we want there, because that directly reflects how much staffing we need to hire to support the routine maintenance through all three sites, and then how much of that maintenance as well.
that was the whole 28
Yeah,
million.
yeah, that was like if we had essentially publicly financed the entire 28 million capital cost. That doesn't cover maintenance and operation costs. If we
Right.
did the entire complex plan, the amount of new facilities on there and all the things that we need to be running out of those facilities and the maintenance of those ones, that's actually the supremely higher cost one. So that would be,
That's $500,000 a year.
Mhm.
Correct. Hmm.
yeah, my goal was essentially to define what we want and then where do we want it within the park, and then build a plan off of that. So I don't want to get into a point where we're doing this kind of paralysis by analysis. It's already been 6 years. We've done the studies. We know how much it costs. We know kind of what people want. I think we have enough data at this point to come to a solution. And then from my standpoint and promise to the board is to deliver them a financially feasible and recommended plan that makes sense to spend public taxpayer dollars on, and then be transparent about how that project is getting implemented.
you know, that. It's like, oh my God. So, I think. I mean, I think what Eileen said probably, speaks to all of us who are affected by that. And, you know, David, of course, Steve, and Pat, I know they're very well aware of that.
Yeah.
So, it's not what said, but it's good to know that we don't. Good to know that, you know, Christine and David understand about
Can I just get your name and address for the record? Thank you.
Okay.
My name is Richard Lahe. I live at 403 Buttonwood in Somerset Lake. My question is with the cost of putting the trails in, was that cost calculated out as just Mike doing all the work or having a contractor come and do all the work, or was options for volunteer organizations and the community to do some of the work added into that? Is that, you know, was that that millions of dollars per whatever section it was that all just professionally done, or was, you know, the opportunity for volunteers to be part of that as well?
I think it
No.
was professionally
So-
done, the initial thing, you know, because the professionals would go in, grade it, survey it and everything. And then kind of what New Garden does now is we have the Friends of the New Garden Trails that maintain our
Yes.
current trails, as you know, I'm sure.
Yes.
So, yes,
Yes.
but that would require, I think, since they do what, maybe 20 acres at this point, to scale that up, we would need.
But they mostly are,
They're mostly seniors and I feel deeply terrible taking advantage of them.
yes,
They
that,
get
and
a month every.
their interest is more walking trails. My interest is more truly multi-use mountain bike, jogging, running, truly multi-use trails.
Mhm.
I know there is a very big mountain bike community. I know there are the trail spinners who take care of White Clay in Delaware. I know there's groups in the Brandywine who take care.
Mhm.
And they are out there clearing trees. They're out there fixing drainage issues. They just rebuilt and put in a new bridge in White Clay. They redid the pump track in White Clay at no cost to the community, because they like the trails, they ride the trails, they want to keep the trails nice. Has that option been even looked at or considered, or is it just the professionals or Mike doing all the work is
No.
what I'm wondering?
As of right
No.
now, I believe we haven't even looked at that because we haven't even got to that point.
And have volunteers for the walking trails. I mean, there's like, I don't know. They're struggling to get volunteers, you know, for that. So it's hard to commit to.
Oh, it's a walking.
Well,
So
yeah,
to answer your question, so from a cost estimate standpoint, the goal is always to get an understanding of what the true cost to do something is. Obviously, if you have a volunteer effort commissioned to perform semblance of duties to reduce that cost, I'm all for that and would recommend it tomorrow. It's just how solvent is that organization? How much are they reliant upon on a servicing need? Because they might have a project over here, a project over there, a project over there. And
There's
without
always
having that kind of
limitations.
township control over the situation, you are basically creating something that only one person that may or may not be absolutely reliable on a year in, year out basis to continue to do that work. Because if they do something and then they kind of dissolve or go away,
Then who's picked
now
up
you're on the hook to
pieces.
do it. So we would have to have some sort of contractual obligation with them to. be able
Which
to
I
do it.
100% understand. I was just wondering if those options were even looked at yet, or was it just, and you answered it, it was just
Yeah.
professional people coming in to do the
Yep.
work.
And also because we hadn't even contemplated pump tracks or bike trails or anything from the YSM study. It was, I think the three kinds were like just, you know, your generic walking through.
And I'm
grass,
not
walking
saying
through-
that we have to put those in.
Right.
Absolutely. Let the terrain dictate what we put in, what's gonna be easiest and the best for what is there with the drainage and the terrain and everything else. I just know that they've done, the trail spinners, and I helped out with them. They've done a lot of work in White Clay. And I know that my friends in the Brandywine, they do a lot of work with even the National Park Service in White Clay or Brandywine. That
Right.
there's very strong groups that have been doing it for many, many years in the area. It just takes a little bit of reaching out and looking for it. So,
And personally, I mean, I wouldn't, the way we let Stan and his master watershed friends take control of a certain part, I wouldn't have a problem with saying, you know, if we're just gonna kind of leave it all to the pot,
there
just
needs
saying,
to
here's
be,
10 acres, you guys that are really,
there needs to be some
Maybe.
oversight by
Yeah.
New Garden, absolutely. But yeah, it might be a good idea to say, hey, guys, come in and hike it, look at it, tell us what you think, what do you want to put in it, and we'll go from there.
Yeah.
So,
that's a
Thank
great
you.
idea. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, if you want to leave behind with Mike in the back, kind of some network contacts about people who provide that. Okay,
Yep.
then there you go.
No, I think they're struggling to have commitment from like additional volunteers. As we expand our trail systems, that's more labor for that organization to be responsible for. And it's, you know, we've heard from them numerous times that it's getting harder and harder from them
Yeah.
to, you know, support.
Yeah,
It's
I don't,
not Support, they want to support, they're doing
Right,
an
yeah.
excellent job. I'm not in no way, shape or form. This is not a negative, it's just they need more support. They need additional volunteers to be able to come out and help maintain.
right.
That's.
Front row.
There we
Yeah, they have, as the second, third Saturday of the month. You all meet at the second Saturday of the month. They meet at the, Friends of the New Garden Trails. They meet at usually it's the Landenberg, or not Landenberg, Laurel Woods Trail, and then, divvy up tasks from there. So. Sure. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Okay. All right. Thank you.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Stan?
Okay, yeah, good evening. Stan Lukoff, 283 Reynolds Road. So a couple questions and comments. So I was part of the YSM study years ago, and I wish we would have had the financial clarity in terms of, the state of the township that, Chris gave a great presentation. I wish everybody would take the time to see that. It was very eye-opening. And basically, had we known what the financial situation was, obviously that whole YSM study would have changed dramatically. So, but again, we are where we are. So a question, do we know what the status of the splash pool renovations is at this point? I mean, I know they entered into an agreement with the township, and to my knowledge, I don't believe anything's been done once they stopped work. So any information can be shed in terms of what their current status is, and if they are planning to do anything with that area?
That's fine. Obviously, very little work has occurred.
Right,
They paid the rent for the year.
that's good.
And I would, at this point, there's not much else that it's a good idea to say.
Well, the only point is that if they are planning to continue their renovations and eventually open up, that will dictate, obviously, that area of the park that needs to be upgraded perhaps, or traffic flow. So that was my only point, is that could also dictate, part of the capital needs or
Yes.
the plans, the short-term plans for the park.
As-
So are you saying,
The lease actually has a fairly limited amount of work on behalf of the township when that becomes operable. But your point is well taken, that there will be some expense. It's relatively limited
okay,
in terms of the output of
has there been
money.
any recent contact with them in terms of reaching out at all?
No,
Okay, are there plans?
I think that's about all I'd like to say right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, next question. So Mike in the presentation mentioned Deerfield, that's, I guess, a tenant on the property or a contractor. Do we know just generally what they're paying the township to have the right to have all their equipment there? And, you know, is there an opportunity for other companies to basically, use a part of the park to allow revenue to the township and therefore offset some of the costs of the park?
There is a lease. I'm sorry. Could you recall, Mike? There is a lease. Yes, okay.
Okay, very good. So the Cedarville engineering contract was mentioned, and are they still involved in the park at all, or is the engineering work turned over to Pinoni at this point?
Yeah, so when I got to the township, I believe we had 5 engineering firms, I think, at some point. So going forward, Pinoni is the primary professional engineer for the township. McMahon/Bowman Consulting is the transportation engineer. And I think AECOM is retained for sewage planning module type reviews, and that is all.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when Cedarville was working on site, did they ever do a comprehensive stormwater analysis of New Garden Hills, or is that?
No
still-
comprehensive analysis for stormwater outside of Tuff Cannon has ever been performed for the township.
Okay.
So you're talking about what was originally done by Arrow from an MS4 standpoint. That was originally, I think, solidified in 2020, and it was at a narrow point of view. So in
Okay.
actuality in of itself, the township needs to go through that exercise as much as New Garden Hills needs to go through that exercise, but
So are
we
there,
haven't done either study to date.
okay, so are there any plans short-term to address the stormwater issues at New Garden Hills, which actually, talks about,
Yeah.
Pete's point also that he brought up in terms of the Broad Run issue.
The opportunity right now falls with the commissioned partnership with the PennDOT project. The issue with that one is it is a constantly moving target from PennDOT's relationship in terms of how much they're willing to fund at an absolute finite amount based off of what their needs are. And we're just a component percentage of that. And so
Okay.
when they did a change order, and this is something I'm hoping to bring forward to the township to rebrief here and based off of their newly commissioned relationship with their vendor going forward, the original cost estimate was at about $2, less than $2 per pound. But that was with the change order that had to happen because that prior vendor was non-compliant from a Pennsylvania DEP standpoint. So
Okay.
they had to change vendors. The new vendor is over 2.5 times the amount. So it's roughly over $5 a pound. So when your needs are over 300,000 pounds total, the math gets blown out. So we're still trying to get our original agreement under the $415,000 that was used of ARPA funding 2 years ago to commit towards having that cost at whatever project that PennDOT kind of is going to be controlling, because they're leveraging this as they want the broader amount that they need. So they're kind of telling us which sites that they want to do because they're in it for the biggest bang for the buck. And we're kind of writing that agreement to get as much as that we need from a compliance standpoint. Now, there was some room there to kind of look at new sites. The issue with is the scale produced by each site. And to my understanding, the scale offered by New Garden Hills is not enough to be able to have the whole PennDOT bang for the buck and our bang for our buck. It would actually be about half of our criteria that would be met from it. So we can come up with a cost sharing approach to have more people add into it to kind of cover that gap, but not by ourselves. So I'm waiting for them to give me the whole cost table and then try to look for other townships that we can partner with so we can do as much at New Garden Hills as possible. Think of it like a stormwater kind of playing ground, if you will, and then also meet our larger needs as a township.
Okay.
And that's all with no additional dollar spent from the township other than the ARPA funding that was already
So
spent.
that's part of the,
That's why I put that there. That might not be realized by the township, but that was 415 that was already spent with ARPA funding. But there would be potential opportunities to spend more.
Okay.
The goal is to not spend any more
Right.
and get other townships to participate and spend their money in our township to do projects in our township. That's why this relationship with PennDOT is really to our benefit, is that they are, I think, no longer doing paid partnerships anymore. We kind of had the door closed in behind us on this last agreement. So really, it's going to be
Okay.
contingent upon how much more we could add to the pot.
Do we know when approximately timing wise, Chris, that scope will be finalized with PennDOT in terms
As
of?
we speak.
So in the
I'm really
next,
excited to try to bring that forward, but
in the
like
next
I
month,
said, it would be
potentially,
hopefully, I
okay,
don't want to speak
good.
out of turn, but within the next few, because I want to get it locked up for FY24 planning.
Great.
Yep.
Next comment. So Mike had mentioned the park mission statement, and I was wondering, is that on the website somewhere, Mike, or is there a
That's
way
actually a
that
good
we could,
question.
access what the mission statement is? Was that was for New Garden Hills, correct? Okay. Okay, because that mission statement may change then based on what actually transpires. Okay. Okay. So the other question was around Smedley Preserve and how that work was being funded or planned to be funded. So obviously it's been, a lot of that was paid for with open space funds and other grants, but are there similar, I know there's not as much planned to be developed on that park. It's mostly a passive park, but do we know what those projected costs will be for Smedley Preserve?
So I believe is it going to be in November? We're going to put forth the final iteration of the master park, what is it? Project summary by Natural Lands, who's our partner and our consultant through that. But think of it in terms of rehabilitation from, kind of turning the land back to its natural state. That's part of the project. That's in its own bucket. But then there's the hard improvements that are not part of that part that are less grant viable that we're on the hook for. And that's roughly that $1.75 million at the very end there. So that is for improvements along Church Road projected, as well as, actually all of it is along Church Road from that matter, but think of it like a parking facility with amenities for, comfort stations and stuff,
The capital.
as well as the actual pedestrian crossing standpoint that's going to have to take probably the initial part of the project is just making sure that people can cross from the west side of the property to the east side property along Church Road safely. So those are the types of things that we will attack it with as much as possible for grants. But even then, most of those grants are 15 to 20, possibly 30% match type grants. So they're very small. And so they don't, other than cash, which is the primary mechanism to make that happen, we don't have a lot of other options.
Okay.
But at least in terms of feasibility, it's just 2 to 3 total projects. That's just that the price tag adds up to be about 1.75.
Okay.
But
And
the scope of it
finally,
is doable.
okay, great. And finally, in summary, my last comment is that I am not in favor of any major capital project for the park or any special assessments that was talked about. My preference would be keeping it more open, green, passive, and minimize the amount of expenditures to the township as much as possible. And again, like Richard was saying, having volunteers do some of the work. We've got a great community of knowledgeable people. So again, I think that would be my preference going forward. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Stan.
Hold on, we're gonna have the general public. Yeah, thanks, Richard.
Hi, my name is Kent Steves. My wife and I operate Braylock Brewing in Kennett Square on 225 Birch Street. And I've come here because I've been looking for another location, a beer garden space outside of what we operate in Kennett Square, and came across your master plan. And so I made contact with Chris and Mike and took a look at the operation there. And so I don't have 28 million for you. If the funding goes through, you have a family-owned business that's interested to take advantage of helping bring more people outside. We already do this. We have a very large beer garden space. The creamery is our neighbor. Many of you might be familiar. It's a whole reason for people to come out, socialize, be outside. We do use it for, I've had flooding. We've had events where we bring volunteers out to help in our area. So there's a lot of things that it can bring. not to mention some kind of rent or, something on, operational expenses. Just as a brief idea for you, because I know it can be maybe concerning long-term about having a business operate inside a park, which many of you may know, it is done in many parks in Delaware. The concept we have is operating a beer garden at I don't know the name of that building that you had designated as a beer garden space. Yeah,
It was the stable, if you will, and it's very much a stable. So
it is very much a stable. Yeah. So it's perfect for a beer garden space, actually. We would, if it were fitting, we'd open it up in phases as the park is opening up in phases. And so it would expand as it makes sense to expand and to fit what the mission and the continued direction would be for the park. We would continue doing beer production in Kennett Square. So our utility needs are basic. It is water, it is electric, it is sewage, but it's not for a manufacturing facility. So those demands are more around because you've got a place where people are gathering and just experiencing outside there. So those types of utilities are not an extra burden, as best I know right now with what I've seen there. Of course, we need parking and general lighting. So I just want to offer it up as if you can get the 28 million, there is a business that's interested. We are keenly interested. I sent a letter of interest in, so you had it even formally. And it's an opportunity for the space. So, and if I had 28 million, I'd give it to you, but thank you.
Before you go down, can I just pick on you for a minute?
Yeah.
This would be the kind of questions I would ask for anyone that would be
Sure.
proposing a beer garden.
Yeah.
Would you be open to, I guess, paying for some part of the amenities that you would be bringing in? I was thinking specifically the putt-putt golf or something like that, or like, the event space, the event field that would be kind of behind that to kind of, mitigate. Certainly it's something that, to
Yeah.
me, if the township's going to pay for it, then it doesn't really make sense for us to just let someone come in
And just use it. Yeah. So in fact, I was just talking to Mike about that putt space. Like,
Yeah.
what shape is it in? Because having something like that renovated, I don't know what it would be, but yes, it's a part of we want to build a venture that would be successful. Like, I don't want to lose money doing it. I'm not looking to get rich. I'm a 60-year-old old man. So, I would be doing this in my 20s otherwise. But I think any business in general knows they have to invest, just like I had to do in Kennett Square in the very old building that we're in. We have to invest in order to have a business there that's viable. So to me, it's a partnership. In the case there, I have a landlord. In the case here, I'd have a landlord. And we'd have to figure out the best way to do that. One element of this phasing in is that barn, that truly stable, pretty tough for you to provide a warm lit shell, which would be standard. The roof's probably in terrible shape. We didn't really dig in on the roof, but so you don't need the building right away. You need enough of that building to satisfy what requirements that Board of Health would have for being able to wash hands for staff, that type of thing. But basic electric. So I think those things can be phased in. I know a lot about pools. I won't talk about that pool facility at all. We have no interest in that. I do also think that amphitheater is a tremendous opportunity there, that I know you're looking at infrastructure for that. We don't have anything like that around this area. Go into Delaware,
Right.
it's just not available. And I think it's an opportunity, but the 28 million is pretty daunting. But I do think as a business person, though, there would be some kind of expectation of that partnership.
Okay.
I don't mean that in a legal sense.
And before you go, could you speak to kind of a little bit, we learned from the state of the township that the age demographic bumps and then it drops off to everyone below 21. And then there's no one between 25 and let's say 55. And then it jumps up to, the 60s. So obviously alcohol cannot be consumed by anyone in that first bump. And then there's no one in the middle. And then you get to the older bump. So in Kennett, what kind of family sort of not demographics, but what sort of family dynamics do you see with your business?
We see, I do not collect age data specifically, but we see a mix from college graduate all the way up to folks in their 70s. It's the whole mix in between. We have a lot of families that come. I wouldn't say we have a predominant age group, if that I can think of, but we don't see a gap like you're mentioning.
Mhm.
The one thing I'll point out, and you may all be aware of it, New Garden Hills Park, if I got the new name right. You know how many people think that's in Delaware?
Yeah.
And so you have to add in the demographics of Delaware since it is so close. And we do draw here and in Kennett Square, we draw a tremendous amount of population from Delaware as well, that I think helps with that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Yeah,
Anybody-
and I'm willing to
anyone else?
answer other questions if you have them, even if you decide you don't want to go with a beer garden. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Have a drive-through brew.
Yeah. You ever been to the Outer Banks? Get yourself a brew through.
Brew, I like this.
Yeah.
We're almost 5 years old. We have looked at, I look at parks all the time because an outdoor space is what I think we all, especially post-COVID, continue to still want to have and enjoy with a little bit of shelter for bad weather. There's some that just don't have all the other attractiveness that New Garden Hills has, if it gets developed. But yeah, I'm always looking. If you got a farm.
Turkey Hill Farm.
Turkey Hill Farm, yeah. I can't buy it. I don't have 28 million or whatever. All right, thank you very much.
For your time.
Thanks.
Yeah. Anyone else want to come up? If you want to come up, that'd be great. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jim Powers. I'm married to that lovely lady who spoke so eloquently earlier. I'm at 240 Crescent in Harrogate. You mentioned that Splash is paying rent, and you said there's some certain costs. Hopefully, the rent is at least covering those costs that's being incurred as a result of Splash.
I think his question was it going to cost money once that becomes operative? And the town, well, my response was that the township's obligation under the lease is limited, is very limited. So I don't obviously have cost figures but the township's obligation, if Splash ever gets up and running, is pretty limited in terms of cost that they have to do.
And so I have another question. I see heavy investment in trails. Can you give me a perspective as to what that is? Because to me, a trail is just a path that's people are beaten down by walking over it. And so I understand that's my feet doing that, not anybody else. So if you could give me a perspective as to why the trails are such a big expense.
Chris could probably, I mean, both Chris's.
Yeah.
But this Chris, I think, could speak to, and I'm thinking about the trail that you guys blazed in Candlewick, and that was quite an adventure, which did start out with us traipsing through the woods using a GPS system to find out where the trail was, and then going through with a bunch of mowers. And so if you want to just briefly speak to that, and then we'll have Chris give hard numbers.
I'm Chris. Can you hear me? Yeah, Chris Robinson. My wife is Ann's right here. The Friends of the Trails organizations started in 2008. A good number of its founders were on the Open Space Committee, which started by the 2005 Open Space referendum that we all voted for to tax ourselves, which created the EIT tax. So the first, well, I'm going to try to answer your question. Yes, it's some sweat equity, meeting your neighbors, getting out there on the weekends, and hacking through. Well, it's interesting because we have 4 trails. The one that has least resistance is the healthiest woodlands, and that's the airport trail. The one that gave us the most resistance is the Mill Race Trail because it was just packed full of multiflora. Today, the airport trail is used primarily by walkers and the airport future aviation group. The Mill Race Trail has a good foot traffic. That's stilt grass, the Japanese stilt grass. It's everywhere. It's still open about this wide because people live close to the trail and use it. Laura Woods Trail there's minimum maintenance in terms of clearing. The big challenge we have there is trees coming down. And either we can't do it, we get a professional clean it out. And then what's the next one? Oh, Candlewick. Candlewick. That has a fascinating history in terms of the mushroom industry. But half of that was a challenge to get through. And the upside of that experience is that the folks who live in Candlewick help build the trail. And they use it. Ultimately, we're trying to connect these trails. So it's up to now, it's been just sweat equity, volunteers, meeting your neighbors, and one sort of like what little every month we get maybe 100, 200 feet or the trail is finished, but it's done and it's accomplished. And that the satisfaction we get is when we don't have to do much trail work is because of people walking the trails. The popular trails all of them are popular, particularly the ones that are close to neighborhoods. So I think the trail in the hills, the New Garden Hills, will be very much used by the people who live in Somerset and North Harrogate because they just have to walk to it. Mike, I'm sorry I couldn't join you yet on Saturday, but I wanted to join him to help build the trail in St. Anthony, the hills of New Garden. So I look forward to continuing that process because I do agree that I think this figure is a little high, but it may be because it's done super professionally, which is the upside of that is that the first impressions are important, which is why I'm eager to find out how. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would also add to the fact that there's an expectation on establishing a trail network on a public facility versus just trailblazing through the middle of your own backyard on private property. So material utilized to actually put down on the trail is a factor. Some people's expectation is it ADA accessible? You know, can anybody get access to the actual trailhead? Therefore, it needs to be a certain width, has to have a certain type of base flooring, certain types of grade to the actual trail. So you're not just doing something where you're like plummeting down a steep cliff without stairs or anything. You have to have kind of the holistic approach towards establishing a trail. And so with the site, if people have not ever been on the facility before and there's on the premise, it is a very complex piece of terrain. There's a lot of undulation. There is nothing established there. We would have to create everything from scratch. And it would have to be, because it's a publicly accessible property, have to appease to the entire masses. It can't just be for, I don't know, like you're thinking like a skiing type trail. It can't be for people who are negotiating like the double black diamonds and it's a difficulty level. You have to address it for everybody, inclusive of trailheads. You have to put mapping and wayfinding type resources. So can you do it for a small dollar amount? Yes, but then you'll get a small dollar product and you'll have other issues that you have to address downstream anyway. So we have to do from a public standpoint, when we're providing a public facility that is accessible to all, the most good for as many people as we can bring to the park as possible, rather than just doing it as cheap as possible, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Upgrading the trails for everybody, basically.
Correct.
Yeah. That explains. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Just one last comment. We've got a beautiful piece of property. And at this point, all we have is a bunch of paper. Study after study after study, presentation after presentation after presentation. I think we need to have something to show for it besides a property that is dedicated to nothing. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else from the public have comments, anything? Otherwise, I'm gonna let Richard Gall have a moment. Yep. Yeah, go ahead.
So a few people in the room, including myself, are part of the study group. And I know at the last study group meeting, there were a lot of people who had a big interest in continuing to help in the planning process. And because it took place during COVID, I don't know that communications were always ideal. And so there were people that recognized that the plan may not have been totally aligned with the sentiment of the committee. There was very good on the recreation sides. I still think there are people out there that would be very interested in helping to steer things and being more involved than you supervisors have the time, to really become immersed in it. And so I put that idea out and hope you'll pursue it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Richard?
Yeah, hi, Richard Gaw, Chester County Press. Mike, Chris, great presentation. I only have two questions. Moving forward, what are the next steps for the Board of Supervisors to determine related to this issue in this presentation? And what is the timeline for these determinations to be made?
I think those will be made in conjunction with our budget cycle coming up. Chris is going to go back, get feedback from everyone. Did we check and see if there were people making comments online, Chris? I should have said that earlier. Okay, but if
No
anyone,
comments.
anyone out there in Radio Land wants to email comments, supervisors@newgarden.org, or if any of y'all didn't want to publicly send comments, feel free to just email. That'll get shot to everyone. I think Chris as well will receive an email, so we can take that in, and then we'll, like I said, he's going to synthesize those and we'll have a better idea.
So the board will assess
Mhm.
the public input and then come up with a solution.
Yes.
And so there's really not, so the timeline of that solution or objective moving forward, decision moving forward is about when, as we come to the conclusion of the next year's budget.
I would hope end of year, so we can get started for FY 2024. Yep. And then have something to sink our teeth into in them.
Thank you. And the last question I have is, would the township consider selling the park to Chester County to be added to the county's already very popular, successful park system?
That is something, I don't want to speak for anyone else. That's something that was raised. I was initially violently against it, just because I was on team. Let's build Disney World. I think as everyone on the committee knowingly laughs. I'm coming around to how soberingly, let's say, screwed we are financially. Personally, where we are right now, I do like the idea of, obviously trails always forever for me. But also, starting that amenities close to Route 7, the $3 million plan. And since we did do it in phases, the idea of hiving it off to some people that might want to do a bike trail I think it's a great idea. But the amphitheater, as part of the concrete jungle that we bought, was not part of the restrictions that we have on the open space funding that we used. So that could be hived off if Chester County wanted to buy an amphitheater, which I think would be really, really nice if you want to put it in the newspaper that maybe there's a symphony in the, let's say, 5 to 10 mile radius If there's a playhouse, a play group in the 5 to 10 mile radius that might want that. If the commissioners want to have events, that's certainly something I would not have a problem with them, with the caveat that we know it is $6 to $8 million.
Yeah, I just wanted to be able to follow up. So in terms of timeline, so we will be opening still tentatively phase 1 trail in October. And so I want to allow at least some time to digest usage during that initial release. So think of it like a soft opening. We're going to get some really good intelligence in terms of who's coming to the park, get some access to it, get some more eyeballs in there, and allow that to help kind of facilitate the extra part of like the next element of the plan. And I wouldn't want to just jump into a capital plan based off of discussions to date that we're having right now to design a 24 to 28 capital plan without using that information. So it's not saying that we wouldn't have anything prepared to attack in 24, but I think we should take this time to be able to look at that, digest everything to date, come up with like a reorganized phase plan that, if it's for trails, we'll not only have a trails cost estimate as it's been kind of analyzed and assessed by our engineers, but we'll also have intelligence in terms of boots on the ground with people going through the park and providing commentary. And that gives us at least a little bit more time frame, because from a planning perspective, it's still just at the end of the day, Mike is the primary parks planner and myself and these sessions to be able to come up with some synthesized, I would call them deliberate decision points that need to be made by the Board of Supervisors.
Right.
So I would caution putting a timeline on 24. We're going to have phase 2, released, and then 5, phase 3. This is going to be, we've taken this much time already to date just to get this stuff figured out. I hate saying what's another year, but it's one of those ones where it's like, we should give ourselves a little bit of understanding of, now that we have an organized plan in place with intelligence of what's actually being used at the park, now we can do it in more alignment with how it's actually being utilized in its current state.
See its effectiveness, measure its effectiveness, and then make your decisions based on that.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anyone have any more? Yeah. Obvious on the website, and I think we'll certainly.
For the
give
most
people-
part, just standards, standard social media channels, stay tuned. We try to get everything out, obviously through our main mechanism, which is our Facebook, which I'll put in a plug for our new Facebook account because of the one that we had lost access to. So you'll be seeing it come out here, within the next month or so, some updated information about the actual opening for the park and hours of operation and everything.
That's my understanding. So password was.
Yeah, we'll put an agenda item out for some updates about everything before we actually open it to the public.
My name is Laura Rennekamp, and I'm at 8943 Gap, Newport Pike. I just wanted to say that sounds like they've already done a lot of work in the park, and that's awesome. Congratulations. The presentation was awesome. The information and the cost analysis was very detailed and daunting, but good to know. I'm really glad that New Garden bought this park and that it won't be developed, even if it doesn't become the park of Disneyland like everybody had hoped. Actually, I hope it doesn't look anything like Disneyland. I think that the trails are an amazing idea and a great place to start because they are like more cost effective, and will get people to actually be able to use the park. Doing it in phases is really smart idea. I studied landscape architecture and worked in Philadelphia for a long time. A lot of the stuff that I ended up doing was pop-up parks and temporary spaces. A lot of those temporary spaces were so well received that they got more funding and more attention and more attraction. Like Spruce Street Harbor Park was only supposed to be there for a month. Then it's still there now. That's like a couple, 6 years now it's been there. So maybe think of pop-ups and things like that you can try to implement just to get use on the space. What else was I going to say? And in terms of trails, I think maybe you can do different levels of trails. Some like for elderly people who need it to be more concrete or decomposed granite, more expensive material. You have to do a lot more grading in those kinds of circumstances. But because New Garden does have that terrain, that's a challenge to make all the trails like that. We do have a lot of trails available to us throughout New Garden. So I don't think they all need to be like that. I think that you can make harder trails for people who don't need it to be as graded and as manicured. I think the mountain biking would be an amazing idea there. And the pool was a really big chunk to bite off right away. I think that probably needs a lot of work and money. And maybe the amphitheater does too, but I also think the amphitheater has the ability to provide income like the beer garden. And those I think maybe a little more accessible than the pool. It sucks that the pool relationship seems to have gone awry and that might affect how the park interacts with the public businesses or whatever in the future, which really is a unfortunate event, but hopefully it doesn't ruin it completely and you can partner with businesses like Greylock, or like my partner Jake he owns an audio firm and would totally be willing to help make that amphitheater come to life any way that we can. I don't know what its structural state is, but
Not great.
not great.
Does it
So
do
to
concrete
my
too?
To my understanding, it was
Yeah.
originally looked at by a group, what was it, Live Nation came out and actually did a kind of ancillary assessment of the amphitheater. Through the engineering follow-up, it's just deemed that the actual like concrete facade work, and so it's just that kind of like stepped nature of it. I don't know if it's code compliant to house the roughly 2,500 plus seats that could be there. So it's really that is in the project in of itself where we kind of lack the defined economies of scale to just do an entire redo of the entire concrete network that's there.
Right.
But in terms of possibilities, yes, I came here from Northern Virginia, and Wolf Trap is a publicly owned asset that actually operates right there in Vienna, Virginia, and it is a great facility. It's
Right.
just,
And like they said, we don't have anything like that around.
yeah, exactly.
A huge draw for people from further away to come and spend money and hang out. So keep up the good work, keep trying, don't give up so quickly. I know people want to see progress, but it is really hard and it is a lot of space. But take off a chunk at a time and you'll get there. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you. And to your point, really quick, I think there was a lot of cleanup that had to take place. I mean, my husband used to like go to camp back there. There's trucks buried back there. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff. I don't know if you remember like Timmy in the Well, but I wouldn't have sent my child back there to play. There's no way. So, I mean, that's what Mike has been doing for like the past, goodness, like 2 years. I mean, so much cleanup. I don't know if we've all given him enough credit in the amount of cleanup that was required just to get to basic, to a point where we can even talk about phase 1 trails in a couple of months, right? So, Mike, good job. Thank you. I know how much trash and holes you filled, so keep up the good work. Thank you.
Anyone else from the public? Okay, anyone from the board want to chime in? I think we got Steve? Ted? I think we got a good idea. I think you might want some specific ways to move forward, or you just want to kind of get feedback and then you'll think about and
Yeah, just general sentiment of the board based off of any of the discussion topics to date. You still have from July, all of the cost summaries that are associated with it. So I think at this point, we understand the task at hand as well as at least an alignment of public input, both from the sentiment analysis tonight, your own perceptions, and just what the all of the details are that roll into this being kind of a very complex project for the township. So I don't know if you had any inputs remaining there in terms of guidance for staff, but from FY24 capital standpoint, I don't know if we give ourselves enough runway to be able to adequately plan to start everything in 24. So I would say my recommendation would be to allow phase 1 to happen, get some feedback. Maybe there's some things that we need to do to structurally improve certain elements of phase 1 in that first iteration of when it opens. And then in the meantime, we will aggressively go back and come up with a phase 2 and beyond plan for the remaining part of the park based off of scope, feasibility, amenities, you name it. So
Okay.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
I like that plan.
Yeah, I want to also briefly mention that your idea about doing a little bit of a time getting feedback and moving from there, I think is a really great idea. So I appreciate that.
no, okay.
So I just want to briefly say that deep thanks to everyone who showed up tonight, to everyone who gave their ideas. Governing is really hard when you're doing it in the dark and you feel like you're feeling around trying to get an idea from what people actually want based on, polls we do, surveys. So I really appreciate you all taking a couple hours out of your night to come and talk to us. Hopefully you come back and we keep working on this. And if you only come when it says New Garden Hills, that's great. We really appreciate you. Any closing thoughts? I just want to mention in the notices, we also forgot October 7th is Community Day. So we will have supervisors handing out Northbrook Orchard donuts and apple cider.
Also known as the day Christy Brodowski stands there by herself and gets attacked by bees. Just want to point that out every year.
So y'all put that on your calendar. Anyone else have any other supervisors have anything?
No.
Nope. All right.
Thank you guys.
All right. Thank you very much for everything. And we're going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting.
Thanks.
Thank you. Good night.